Hello and welcome to this episode of T-Tech. Today we're configuring the Wireguard VPN on OpenBSD. So we're going to go ahead here. We just have a server and client. We're going to start on the server. Let's log in. And the first thing with any VPN is you want to create an overlay network. So not an overlay, but a transport. So this network is the real network, and it's going to route packets between the client and the server. You need them for any VPN. So we're going to go ahead and echo the overlay network we want to use, the IP addressing 10.10.10.2 with a slash 30 mask. And you want to put that just in a hostname file here. And now let's do sh etcnet start and bring those up. So double check that. It is on there. In addition, though, you also want to check the routing table. Make sure you have a 10.10.10.0.30 route. We do. Make sure your interface is correct, whatever you're using. So now we need a firewall configuration. So that's etc pfconf. And we're going to make, in this case, two macros. I'm going to make em1 as my external and em0 as my internal. If you only have one interface on your server, just make one macro. You don't even need one, but that's what I'm doing here. So we're going to do set skip on LO0, set block policy drop. And all we're actually going to do here is just pass in on the internal interface from any source to any destination and keep state. Now it's very important that you say any, because if we want to use this as a proxy later, you need to allow traffic destined to anything. So let's save that. Let's check it. Okay, let's flush everything and reload that. Okay, so everything running on the server, at least on the em0 interface, will be accessible. Now we're going to go ahead and start to create the WireGuard interface. So do remember, em0 is a physical port on the server, but the WireGuard interface is in software. So we're going to do ifconfig Wg0 create, and we're going to run a command here and use its output in our ifconfig command. So we're going to use open, you got to actually specify what that is first, Wg key. So the argument to Wg key will be the output of this command. Open SSL, rand, and then we're going to use -base64. This is the encoding of the string that OpenSSL will generate. You want to end that with 32 and then end that with a matching parenthesis. Okay, after that though, we want to do WG port 443. This is the port that the server is listening on. So let's hit enter on this. And now let's verify that that interface is there. And it is. And make sure WG pub key has a string in there. That's our base 64 string. And WG port, make sure that is in there. Don't put addressing information on yet. So you don't have to check the routing table yet for this interface. Now at this point, we need to exchange the key with the client, but we need to set up some stuff on the client first. So we're going to run netcat on the server here. We're going to listen on port 80 and redirect anything we get into a file client key. So hit enter on that, and it's a blocking call. It's a blocking program, so it's going to wait for input and just keep running indefinitely. So we're going to pause here. I'll see you on the client, and then we'll start that configuration. And we're going to log in as root. First thing we want to do again is create that transport network. So we're going to do 10.10.10.1. Again, these are directly connected. Yours may not be, of course, But as long as you have valid routes through the WAN, you can get to them. So we're going to go ahead and have that. We're going to put it in our hostname file. And we're going to go ahead and start the interfaces just right off that with a semicolon. You don't have to do that, but it's just a little bit quicker. Let's check the interface. The IP is on there. So same thing here. We're going to go ahead and check the routing table. Make sure that same subnet is in there. Make sure it's pointing out the correct interface. Now at this point though, it's important to stop, regardless if they're on two separate IP networks. Doesn't matter. Make sure you can ping the other end of the server's address. So make sure you can ping 10.10.10.2 in our case. Alright, we can. And you want to make sure that works before you go through with this step. I will say, you don't have to use netcat like I'm using here. It's just a convenience. You can copy and paste. If you have SSH to the server, that's fine too. All you got to do is make sure the public key string is exchanged between the client and server to make this work. So we have connectivity, so let's go ahead and create a Wg0 interface on the client. We're going to use the same setup. The OpenSSL, the same encoding and everything as far as that goes. And that will go ahead and make that. The difference is we didn't have a port because this is a client. We don't need unsolicited connections to a client, obviously. So Wg pub key, make sure it has a value. That's really all we need right now. Don't put addresses on yet. And now we're going to go ahead and make sure that network was working underneath all of this on the physical interface. But we're going to do looking at Wg0. We're going to look for pub key, and we're going to use the command awk, and we're going to print the second field from that output, and then wrap that in the brackets there. And then we want to take all of that output, which is the pub key string, and use netcat and send it to our server that has a listening netcat on port 80. So if we hit enter on this, we typed everything right, it should send. So now at this point, if we go back to the server and just Control-C it, you see how it's blocking. They had a TCP connection, but it's torn down now. If we look at client key, now we have this string that is the client's public key. We have to use this string to finish this configuration. So I will see you in a second. Now we're going to go back to the server and we're going to utilize this pub key from the client in the server's Wireguard configuration. Alright, now that we have that file copied over, let's go ahead and utilize that from the client on the server. So we're going to go ahead and run k equals, we're going to use a backtick, and we're going to cat client key, and then wrap that in a backtick. What this does is runs the cat command with client key, and the output from the cat command is going to get put in a variable called k. So if we hit return on this, and then echo k, we have the string. So the reason we have the string is, it's stored in the variable. And, this is just an alternative to copying and pasting, but it's a good thing to know how to do as well. Now, to do this, to use the string, we're going to do ifconfig Wg0. We've already created the interface, mind you. So Wg peer. Every peer that wants to connect in Wireguard has to have its public key configured on the Wireguard interface. Otherwise, you're not going to have a secure connection, and it's not going to work. So we're going to use that variable, though, instead of typing the string. And then we're going to do WGAIP. This is the Wireguard allowed IP addresses. In this case, we're only going to have one address allowed. So we're going to use 1.1.1.1/32. This is the only address that the packets that come into the WireGuard interface, they have to only come from this one address, otherwise they'll be dropped. Okay? Now, this isn't a firewall rule. This is the WireGuard access control itself. So this is irrespective of any firewall rules you may have on the server. All right, let's hit enter on that. Now, you do want to make sure that that went in there. Now we should have Wg pubkey, which should be different from the Wg peer. All right, you should see transmit receive. You should see the allowed IP on there. Now, we're going to put the IP addressing on there now. So we're going to do ifconfig Wg0 1.1.1.2. We're going to use a /32 mask. This could be an entire /24 or /16. That does not matter. So we're going to have that, and we're going to say up on this. And you want to verify, just like with the transport network. But now we've created the overlay network. This network cannot communicate unless the transport network is working first. All right? They depend on each other. You can't have one without the other. So we have the address just like any other interface. Let's check the routing table. Now you should see this network. You should see 1.1.1.2, and it should be out of Wg0. You need to have that before we continue. So from here, we need to get this peer key, the pub key from the server over to the client. So we're going to do the reverse of what we did. I'm going to pause here. I will see you on the client. All right, so now we're on the client, and we're going to go ahead and run netcat-l again. We're going to listen on 80. Oh, before we do that, disable your firewall. We're going to use netcat on 80. And again, we're going to put whatever we get from that input into serve key. So then we want to go back to the server, and we want to run that same command, ifconfig grep pub key, and then we want to print out the second field, and then we want to use netcat and send that over to that port on the client. So now if we go over, if we look at serve key like before, and then if we look at WireGuard on the server, you should see Wg pub key. You want that to match the text in the serve key file. It does in this case. So we're going to do the same thing. We're going to do k equals a backtick, and we're going to cat that file. And it does the same thing for the same reasons. And make sure it's in the variable correctly. Now we're going to use the ifconfig command on this interface, and its peer is the server's pub key, of course. So once we have that, we also need to set Wg Endpoint. Now, this endpoint is not the WireGuard overlay network for the VPN. This endpoint is the transport network underneath, because it has to actually route the WireGuard packets there. So we're going to do 10, 10, 10, 2, and then you want to have a port number. That port number is 443, and I didn't mention before, but WireGuard uses UDP port 443, at least by default. Now, the WGAIP again, in this case with a client, we want everything to use this interface. We're not going to be picky about it because nothing is connecting in unsolicited from the internet. So we're going to have that there. We're going to hit enter on that. It's good practice to verify that everything is taking effect before you bring it up, because otherwise you're going to have an error. But you do want to make sure WG peer and everything matches on server and client right now before we do the last step on the client, which is configuring the overlay network for the Wg0. So we're going to do 1.1.1.1 with a /30, and then we're going to bring this interface up. Okay, the interface is up and running. Now at this point, go back over to the server. Let's run tcp dump -ni on the transport interface, and let's send one ping over to the server. Good, that got through how it should have. And now, if we go ahead and ping, which for now, let's go ahead and change this dump to look at Wg0. All right. Now, instead, let's ping 1112. All right. So if we ping that, it hits the WireGuard interface. But if we go back and look at the transport interface, if we send that same ping along, you see that WireGuard keep alives are there because the connection has been established. You can see that it is actually an encapsulated WireGuard packet, only going to the server's address and port number, so we can't see what's in it. At this point, we've achieved encryption and integrity with a VPN connection. So what we're going to do from here is talk about some add-ons to this. We're going to talk about how we turn that server into a proxy and how we can make it so the client only uses the WireGuard server for all of its traffic. Finally, we're going to go ahead and actually enable IP routing through the server and turn this into a proxy. So only on the server to begin with, we're going to go into pfconf. Well, actually, before we do that, we do have two interfaces on this. Even if you have one, where you put this firewall rule will be the same and have the same effect, basically. In my case, though, I do have to get an address here, and that's just my configuration. This is similar to if you had a network firewall and you were coming into it and then routing out through the VPN and using it as your source address, so as a proxy. What we'll end up doing is going into that pfconf again. All I'm going to add is pass out on the external interface from any to any. Again, this is a proxy, so the IP addresses, source and destination, aren't going to be coming from this machine itself. But for that traffic, we want to change the source with nat-2, and then in parentheses, we're going to specify the external interface because we want to change any packets coming out of the server to be that address that the server actually has. In your case, this would probably be just one interface, but you still need to change the source address. So because a proxy doesn't work if it's still coming from the same source as a client, that defeats the purpose. So we're going to go ahead, let's check to make sure that worked. All right, let's flush everything. If you are connected when you do that command, your SSH is going to drop, so be careful with that. Maybe just flush the rules. Let's reload that. All right. Now, we also need to enable routing in this case because the packets aren't going to be, the packets are going to be sourced somewhere else besides the server. So they're not going to be destined for the server. So we need to route them. So to do that, we're going to vi etc sys, and let's just echo it. We're going to echo net init IP forwarding equals 1. We want to put that into etc sysctl.conf. And just for convenience, let's turn that on so we don't have to restart anything. All right. So make sure your firewall, of course, at this point is enabled, as well as make sure that you have the rules loaded. At this point, we're going to look at the external interface with TCP dump. And we're going to run over here to the client. Now, look at the routing table on the client, and you're going to see the only Wg0 entry in the routing table, at least network-wise, is the 1112 and 1111 addresses. What we want to end up doing is you'll see the client doesn't have a default route. So if we ping Google, one, it can't look it up, but it can't look it up because it can't get packets to a DNS server to resolve that domain. So we're going to go ahead and just add route add Let's clear that so there's no confusion. Route add default. This is going to be the end of the WireGuard interface, not the transport network. We're using that tunnel network, or that overlay network in other words. And that's going to be 1.1.1.2 here. This means all of our traffic from our client, if they're associated with the WireGuard VPN, will go through logically to the VPN's WireGuard interface at the server end. Okay, so if we ping now to Google, you see the traffic went through. And then it got on the other interface. And if we do a NAT translation, oops, I'm sorry, pfctl ss, you see that you have that traffic going through. You can tell it's natted because you have the parentheses, and you can see what it was changed to. It was changed to the 192.168.0.174. So no different than what you do on a router when you want to share that address. The proxy has to change the source, so it's connecting on your behalf. It's a proxy. So if we look, though, at the WireGuard interface, well, let's look at EM0, the transport. If we do that same command, the only thing we see, and like if this was in a data center and someone was sitting here on EM0 with a span from like a Cisco switch or anything, you're able to see the traffic, yes, but they're seeing the encrypted packets that are encapsulated with WireGuard. So unless they have physical access to log into the console of the server, they're not going to be able to see the actual traffic unencrypted. So if we look at WireGuard, though, and do that last ping, this is the actual traffic, because the WireGuard interface knows how to decrypt the traffic with the public key. So it's using public and private keys to be able to decrypt the traffic on the fly. And if you want to add more clients to a WireGuard VPN, you just make more WG peer values on the server. It's as simple as that. And, as we've seen, if you want it as a proxy, you have to enable routing, IP routing. IPv6 would be the same thing. You just put an IPv6 address on the WireGuard interface and your transport network interfaces, and you'd enable IPv6. So it's net and net IP6 forwarding. But hey, that's how we do this. And the cool thing is that overlay network with the WireGuard is just sitting between the two transport networks. It doesn't know any different. You got to remember, though, you need the transport network before you put the overlay on. It's with any VPN, and that's very important to remember. But with all that, it's Tyler with T-Tech. I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you for watching, and have a very nice day.